Japan accepted the Potsdam Declaration and surrendered to the Allies. Then, Douglas MacArthur, who had been appointed Supreme Commander for the Allied powers, arrived in Japan. To ensure that Japan never again becomes a threat to America, to completely destroy Japan's military power and proceed with demilitarization, to transform Japan into a peaceful nation and achieve democratization. He set foot on Japanese soil with these grand missions in mind. The surrender ceremony was then held aboard the American battleship Missouri, anchored in Tokyo Bay. For Japan, it was a historic moment that marked the end of approximately 15 years of war. However, the ceremony lasted only 20 minutes. Thus began the occupation of Japan. Under this occupation, a system was established to govern Japan. The Far Eastern Commission was established as the highest authority for occupation policy. It consists of a total of 11 countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, China, and the Soviet Union. The occupation policy toward Japan decided by this Far Eastern Commission was communicated to the U.S. government. From there, specific orders were given to the General Headquarters of the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, or GHQ. Furthermore, GHQ issued orders and recommendations to the Japanese government, which then implemented them. However, General MacArthur, head of GHQ, often clashed with the U.S. government over the occupation policy of Japan. He sometimes acted on his own initiative. In this way, MacArthur's wishes came to be strongly reflected in Japan's occupation policy. GHQ, led by MacArthur, issued one order after another to the Japanese government and rapidly implemented policies of demilitarization and democratization. This will bring about major changes to Japan's political, economic, and social structures. First, GHQ promoted the demilitarization of Japan. They disarmed the Japanese military and disbanded the Navy and Army. In addition, they carried out the requisition of military factories. In this way, Japan's military power will be drastically reduced. Once demilitarization had progressed to a certain extent, GHQ then moved on to promote democratization. The Japanese government initially aimed to restore the country to its pre-war state. However, GHQ believed that simply returning Japan to its pre-war state was not enough and that fundamental reform was also necessary. They went on to implement further social reforms. In order to build a democratic country, reform of Japan's Diet was necessary. This was because at this time, shortly after the end of the war, the Diet was mainly made up of members who had been elected through wartime Yokusan elections. It could not be said that this adequately reflected public opinion. So they decided to dissolve the Diet and hold new elections, thereby re-establishing a Diet based on popular will. At this time, GHQ established a policy that those who had cooperated with the war were not to hold important positions. They banned war criminals, military personnel, etc. from becoming MPs. With this new Diet in place, Japan needed to choose its next prime minister. The Japan Liberal Party was the leading party in the recent election. Therefore, its president, Ichiro Hatoyama, is recommended as prime minister. However, GHQ put a stop to this. Ichiro Hatoyama had a history of causing incident of the violation of the supreme command before the war. GHQ decided that this might violate the policy that people who cooperated with the war should not hold important positions. As a result, Ichiro Hatoyama's inauguration as prime minister was not approved and he was forced to give up the position. Shigeru Yoshida, who became president of the Japan Liberal Party, became prime minister in his place. This marked the return of party cabinets to Japan. Under Shigeru Yoshida, the Constitution of Japan, which can be said to be the framework of modern Japan, was promulgated. This constitution sets out three major principles: national sovereignty, pacifism, and respect for fundamental human rights. With the enactment of this constitution, the Japanese government began to develop related laws. Many new laws were enacted based on the spirit of the new constitution. The existing laws have also been significantly revised. Now let's look at the world. The United States and the Soviet Union, which cooperated during World War II, became the centers of the Western Bloc, which advocated liberalism, and the Eastern Bloc, which advocated socialism, respectively. They gradually became more and more at odds. The United States and the Soviet Union avoided direct armed conflict. However, there were occasions when forces backed by the United States and those backed by the Soviet Union clashed. This is how conflict between the two camps is emerging all over the world. The Cold War was an event that determined the international situation after the war. Originally, the United States had envisioned supporting the Chinese nationalist government led by Chiang Kai-shek and making it the core of the Western camp in Asia. For this reason, they adopted a policy of thoroughly demilitarizing and democratizing Japan, thereby weakening it. However, in China, after a civil war between the Communist Party and the Kuomintang, the Communist Party emerged victorious. The People's Republic of China was established with Mao Zedong as chairman, and they joined the Eastern Bloc. Meanwhile, the defeated nationalist government fled to Taiwan, and the Republic of China government led by Chiang Kai-shek continued to exist. Thus, America's plan to make China a key player in the Western camp was thwarted. This forced the United States to look for an alternative. What then emerged was a new policy of making Japan a key player in the Western camp. Thus, the United States began to value Japan as a member of the Western camp. They changed the policies that had weakened Japan's economic power, encouraging Japan's reconstruction and independence, and shifting to a policy that would strengthen Japan's economic power. The outbreak of the Chosen War made this policy shift decisive. In the first place, with the end of the war, Japanese rule on the Chosen came to an end, and the movement for independence was on the rise. But even here the influence of the Cold War is evident. The 38th parallel north was the dividing line between the Republic of Korea, South Korea, led by President Syngman Rhee in the south, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Chosen, led by Prime Minister Kim Il-sung in the north. Meanwhile, the Communist Party came to power in China. This prompted Chosen to launch a military invasion of the South. Naturally, the United States, which supports South Korea, is not remaining silent. They will immediately convene a UN Security Council meeting and decide to send in United Nations forces. In this way, they managed to repel the Japanese Korean army once and for all. The situation later changed dramatically when Chinese troops joined the war on Chosen's side. The battlefront continued to ebb and flow near the 38th parallel, and eventually a ceasefire agreement was signed. The impact of the Chosen War caused the United States to once again recognize Japan's strategic value. They felt a sense of crisis that if things continued as they were, Japan might end up joining the Eastern Bloc. They therefore wanted to end the occupation quickly and incorporate Japan into the Western camp. In light of this, GHQ determined that the original objectives of the occupation, demilitarization and democratization, had already been achieved. They changed the policy that had been keeping Japan's industrial production capacity low to one that strongly promoted economic recovery. Japan accepted this change in American policy and embarked on a full-scale economic recovery. Fortunately for Japan, the Chosen War meant that the American military needed huge amounts of supplies. This demand provided a boost and got Japan's economy back on track. Industrial production recovered almost to pre-war levels. A peace conference was then held in San Francisco. Japan then signed the Treaty of San Francisco with 48 countries from the liberal camp, including the United States and Great Britain. The signing of this treaty marked the end of more than 6 years of Allies' occupation. Japan will regain its sovereignty as an independent nation, and Japan was to return to the international community as an important member of the liberal camp. However, this peace treaty left many unresolved issues, including the normalization of diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union, the failure to establish diplomatic relations with China, the issue of reparations to Asian countries, and the Northern Territories issue. These issues remained important problems that Japan had to face even after Japan's independence.